been with us and been at the conference before, you will, I'm sure, notice there are certain departures this year. One is that we've got chocolate puddings with the keynote. We've never done that before. So give us your feedback about that. But actually, the main thing I was going to say on that is that this is the first occasion on which we've had a theme title for the conference. And it's something that I think is a good idea. I think it's fair to say it's quite a broad theme title, Art and Science and Transpersonal Psychology. But we come now to our keynote speakers and this session, which is really focusing on science. Science, the delusions, the science delusion, which Rupert has written about and will be talking about, and Harris Friedman, who has done a lot of work using quantitative methods in scientific methods in relation to transpersonal psychology. I'll introduce Harris a bit later. So just to say, the format of this session is that I'm asking each of them to speak for something like 45 minutes, and that should leave us some time at the end to have a bit of a panel. So with that in mind, I would suggest that we hold back on questions. So when Rupert finishes, if you have any burning questions for Rupert, then obviously we'll have the questions. But I would like you to hold back more general questions for the panel at the end, when we can open up for this, I think, very crucial question about the relation of science, scientific methods, especially to transpersonal psychology. Rupert Sheldrake, I think, is very well known to most, if not everyone in this room. He has been at this conference before. I would say that he's a friend of our section, and he's a prolific author. He's a biologist and author. Again, I'm sure many of us have read his books. Certainly, it seems to be going back a long time now. But the first book, which exploded with a lot of interest and reactions in the field, the hypothesis of the new science of life, the hypothesis of formative causation, and this whole idea of morphic fields, which I think has really taken root in our area. And more recently, he wrote about parapsychological approaches, and most recently, the science delusion, which I highly recommend, and that's the subject on which he's going to speak to us. And just to say that, as you can see, there are copies of his book here, and very generously he's going to be selling these at a reduced price, a bargain, if I might say. And there's a basket. Rupert has even provided £5 notes. You might wonder what they're for. The books are priced at £15, and obviously if you've got £20 you can be able to get the change, so that's what they're there for. So without further ado, I hand over to Rupert.
Well, thank you. It's very good to be with you again. The science delusion is the belief that science already understands the nature of reality in principle, leaving only the details to be filled in. This is a very widespread belief. We all encounter it in daily life, especially among academic friends and colleagues. I guess most people in this room are somewhat skeptical of it, otherwise they wouldn't be here. But it's extremely widespread, and I think it is a terrible delusion. I think there's a conflict in the heart of science between science as a belief system and science as a method of inquiry. And since the 19th century, science has been a wholly owned subsidiary of materialism, which is a philosophy of nature. It's a metaphysical view of nature, but it's taken over the scientific world, and that's become the basis of what is mostly accepted as orthodoxy. The trouble with materialism as a belief system is that most people who believe it don't know they believe it. They just think it's the truth. They think other people have beliefs, but they know the truth. Religious believers are aware that their beliefs are beliefs. Materialists are generally not. And the beliefs that make up this belief system consist of 10 key dogmas. And these dogmas are not actually taught explicitly to people in the course of a scientific or general education. They're simply absorbed as assumptions that everybody else assumes, so they don't get questioned. What I do in this book is take the 10 dogmas of science and turn them into questions to see how well they stand up scientifically. If we ask how well grounded are these in terms of empirical science and how can we test them, then science opens up in a new way. In every case, almost every case, it's possible to do experiments, and I myself am very keen on simple experiments that can be done on low budgets or that could make a big difference. And so I won't have time to talk about them all this evening, but what I'm going to do is start by outlining the 10 dogmas, and then I'll only have time to discuss 3 or 4 dogmas this evening. Because obviously it's a limited time, and I can't really deal with a dogma in less than about 5 minutes. So the 10 dogmas are, first and foremost, nature is mechanical, machine-like. This is the beginning of 17th century science is based on this idea. Nature is mechanical or machine-like. Before that, why it was a revolution, before that, people believed that nature was organic, nature was alive, animals and plants had souls. Aristotelian philosophy, as modified by St. Thomas Aquinas, was the orthodoxy of British universities and indeed universities everywhere, and it was essentially animistic. The machine theory cut all that off. The universe is not alive, it's dead, it's mechanical, it's inanimate, matter's unconscious, and nature is just made up of machinery. The designs and the purposes of the machinery are external to nature in the mind of a designing God. Nature itself has no purpose. Dogma 2 follows from that. Matter is unconscious. The whole of the universe is made up of unconscious matter, and the only conscious thing in the entire universe is a small region of the human brain. Descartes thought it was the pineal gland. Most modern people have shifted the centre of consciousness a couple of inches into the cerebral cortex, but it's essentially the same theory. The whole of the universe, all the stars, the galaxies, is all unconscious, but we're conscious because we're different and special. And Descartes thought that humans had a spirit or mind which was separate from the inanimate matter of their body, and the only other things with minds that were not material were angels and God. So matter's unconscious. Third dogma, the laws of nature are fixed. The laws and constants are the same today as they were at the moment of the Big Bang, and they'll be the same forever. Dogma 4, the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. The principle of conservation of matter and energy. Dogma 5, nature is purposeless. Evolution has no purpose or direction, and there's no purposes in nature. Dogma 6, biological inheritance is material. Everything you inherit is inherited materially, except for cultural inheritance, largely in the genes, and now in some epigenetic modifications, material changes to the DNA or to the proteins that bind to it, or cytoplasmic inheritance. Dogma 7, memories are stored as material traces inside brains. Dogma 8, the mind is inside the head. Mental activity is brain activity. It's all inside the head. Dogma 9, which follows from Dogma 8, psychic phenomena are illusory. If the mind is nothing but the activity of the brain, then intentions and thoughts can have no influence at a distance. And hence, any evidence for telepathy, precognition, must be treated with unremitting skepticism. If the evidence gets very persuasive, then you just move the goalpost and say there isn't enough. We had an example of that today in the reaction to Darrell Benn's work, which Chris French summarised so well. I mean, sorry, Chris wrote. In dogma 10, mechanistic medicine is the only kind that really works. Alternative and complementary therapies may appear to work. People may get better after seeing practitioners, but that's because they would have got better anyway, or it's nothing but the placebo effect. Real medicine depends on physical or chemical treatments, surgery or drugs, and therefore that's the only kind that should be supported by medical research council, official medical organisations, medical schools and so forth. And so all other forms are answered beyond the pale, with a few exceptions in the NHS now, but basically mechanistic medicine is the only kind that really works. Well, that's a familiar worldview. And that's the worldview, the default worldview of most educated people. It's considered to be modern, scientific, rational. It's the product of a kind of the science and reason agenda of Enlightenment rationalism. Well, I'm all in favour of science and reason as long as they're scientific and reasonable. And what I think we need is a kind of enlightenment of the Enlightenment and really look at these beliefs in the light of science and reason. I'm just going to start with one that's probably unfamiliar to you, at least the questions about it. Everybody here has heard about the mechanical worldview and so forth, but the dogma that I myself challenged last, only 2 or 3 years ago did I begin to question it when I started writing this book, is the principle of conservation of matter and energy. I thought this was so certain, so sure, that I'd never questioned it before, and I thought if anything's certain in science, it's that. And I rather wanted it to be true, because I thought if I deal with 10 dogmas and I say all 10 are wrong, I might sound biased. If one of them turns out to be right, that would be actually quite good. So I went into this with a very open mind, and actually rather on the side of the principle of conservation of matter and energy. I'm going to deal with it briefly. I know it's not psychology, but it just gives a flavour of some of these other issues in science. You might think this is something that's been worked out with incredibly accurate measurements, with people weighing things to fractions of nanograms and so forth. Not so. This dogma came about for historical reasons. It originated in ancient Greece with the atomist philosophers who said they were the prototypic materialists. Everything is matter. The eternal reality is matter. Matter is made of lots of little bits, atoms, that by definition can't be split up or created or destroyed. Therefore, the total number of atoms is always the same. The principle of conservation of matter. Ancient Greece. It was reformulated in a more rigorous way in the 17th century. Nature was made up of corpuscles or atoms of matter that were made by God in the first place, but being divine creations remained eternal thereafter. That's really where it comes from. Also in the 17th century, the founders of mechanistic science had this mechanistic theology with a kind of mechanistic God, who designed and created the world machine and then set it in motion at the beginning and impelled it into motion, giving it a certain amount of divinely created energy or movement. And therefore that couldn't decay because it was God-given. This was all formulated more rigorously in the principle of conservation of energy in the first law of thermodynamics in the 1850s. But the roots of this belief system are theological and philosophical. It was not something that was tested to many places of decimals. Having been established as a doctrine, then it was just taken for granted. And most people learn it in school, in physics textbooks and things, and it's just something you don't question. But physicists themselves have less problem with questioning it. Most of us are overawed by physicists, but they themselves are less overawed by physicists, being physicists themselves. And in the 1980s, it turned out there were serious anomalies in astronomy in understanding the orbits of stars within galaxies. The stars were orbiting the centres of galaxies in a way that couldn't be explained in terms of the amount of matter in the galaxies. There wasn't enough gravitational pull. The other thing is galaxies were attracting each other to form clusters in such a way that they could only do this if they had a lot more mass than they seem to have. If you add up all the matter in the stars, the gas clouds, make a generous allowance for black holes, planets, and so forth, they just simply haven't got enough mass to explain the way stars behave in galaxies or the way galaxies attract each other. Now, this could mean one of two things. Either the laws of gravitation and the understandings of galaxies and the fundamental principles of astronomy are wrong, or that there's a whole lot extra matter that would make the whole thing work. It just so happens that it's not matter that's been observed. So they took the easy way out. They said, well, there must be extra matter. Well, how much extra matter? Well, exactly the right amount to make the equations balance. Just add it in at will, and you can explain all the phenomena. And if one galaxy has a bump in a funny place, then there must be more dark matter in that place to explain it. So this magical dark matter was invented or hypothesized in exactly the right amounts in exactly the right places to explain the phenomena. And it turns out there's about 5 times more than there is of regular matter. Having added all this extra matter into the universe, there was a further problem. Now it was so much more massive, the gravitational attraction of the universe should be slowing down the expansion of the universe, and it led to the prediction it would slow down, stop expanding, and then begin to contract until it accelerated inwards further and further, till it all ended in the opposite of the Big Bang, known in the trade as the Big Crunch. And this was a widespread belief at the time. People were expecting it to contract because of all this extra dark matter. But then in the late 1990s, it turned out that the furthest away galaxies are not slowing down in their recession, they're speeding up. The universe is actually expanding faster and faster. Why? All this extra dark matter wouldn't explain it. In fact, it made it hard to expand. Well, there's a simple solution to that. There must be a form of energy pushing it apart that hadn't been known about before, dark energy. So now the universe has all this dark energy in it, and the total amount of dark matter and dark energy is now 96% of reality. The matter and energy that we learned about at school, to which these conservation laws are supposed to apply, is less than 4% of reality. Now, what is dark matter and what is dark energy? Nobody knows. Their nature is literally obscure. There's a lot of discussion in physics about them, but nobody knows. And even worse, the amount of dark energy, as it makes the universe expand, leads to the creation of more dark energy, because as the universe expands, you have to have more dark energy to make it expand further, and it creates more space and more dark energy. And the universe is now a perpetual motion machine. So, what about the conservation of matter and energy? Is dark matter and dark energy conserved? Well, who knows? Can they be converted to regular matter and energy? This room is full of dark matter and energy. Could some of them turn into regular energy, in which case it would seemingly appear from nowhere, or disappear? Nobody knows. One theory of dark energy, the quintessence field theory, says yes, it can be turned into regular matter and energy. There's some evidence that dark matter may be generated inside the galactic centers of galaxies. There's a lot of debate in the physics literature about this. But anyway, any naive ideas that you might have had about the conservation of matter and energy simply don't apply to this new cosmology. And some people in physics want to modify the laws of gravity to get rid of dark matter, so you can just tinker with the laws and adjust the laws, and they may succeed, in which case all this dark matter would suddenly disappear from physics. But nobody's going to say you can't do that, it violates the principle of conservation of matter. Anyway, that's the situation we're in. Meanwhile, there are people who claim to have energy devices which produce more energy than you put into them. Now, these are the ultimate taboo in science, perpetual motion machines. And as soon as any inventor comes up with one, there's howls of derision, and they're simply relegated to the outer darkness of parascience. Nevertheless, there are quite a few of these inventors working in sheds, in factories, small factories with private finance. Go on the internet and look under free energy devices or above unity devices, and you'll find a huge number of these. There are dozens of fairly serious contenders. Why don't governments invest in them? Why don't energy companies invest in them? Because as soon as they talk to their physics advisors, they say, don't touch it with a barge pole, this is just a perpetual motion machine crank. But these people aren't actually claiming that they're making energy from nothing. They claim they're converting either dark energy or more commonly the zero-point energy of the quantum vacuum field, which is supposed to be a vast reservoir of energy on which reality as we know it floats like waves on the ocean. This room is supposed to be full of inconceivable quantities of energy in the quantum vacuum field. Can we tap it? Well, some people say they're actually doing it, but no one will listen to them. My answer here would be to have an international competition for the best above unity device, a £1 million prize, a fair test, not trying to debunk people, but trying to see if any of these things work. If several work, then the one that works best would get the prize. If none work, the prize wouldn't be awarded. Now, the conventional physicists and people who believe in the conservation principle ought to welcome this venture, because they would predict that no one will win the prize, and then they'll be able to say, I told you so. I think actually, I don't know how confident they would be. I think the best thing would be to have the betting companies like Littlewoods open a book on the energy prize, and people who think that no one will win it could put their money where their mouth is, and we just see how confident they feel in this. I think it would be really fun. It would free things up. If any of them do win it, it would completely transform the world economy. And the reason this isn't happening now is a barrier in thought, a taboo, a dogma. In the realm of life, the dogma that energy conservation is all-pervasive is also very widespread. It's universal in biology. When people like Hindus talk of prana or Chinese talk of chi as forms of energy, these are instantly dismissed as, at best, metaphorical. How sure are we that living organisms do in fact obey the law of conservation of matter and energy? It was enunciated as a doctrine by Hermann von Helmholtz in the 1850s, not on the basis of any evidence from experiments, but on the basis of the doctrine that living organisms are machines, therefore they obey the same laws as ordinary machines. It's a dogma, a principle, an assumption. The first attempt to measure it in human beings was around 1899 to 1902, the classic experiments of Atwater and Benedict in the United States. Humans in calorimeters for 3 weeks, all the heat given out, all the work done, all the energy taken in through food, all the feces and urine produced, all analysed, carbon dioxide out, oxygen in, all measured. And they came out with the expected result. And everybody said, it's the last nail in the coffin of vitalism, at last it's all been proved, we now know, etc. And so certain was this that it wasn't re-examined until the 1970s, when an American nutritionist called Paul Webb redid their experiments, came up with glaring discrepancies. People who were overeating and not doing any exercise were producing 25% too little energy, whereas people who were exercising and not eating were somehow getting 25% more energy than they should have done. He went back and looked at the classic paper of Atwater and Benedict and found they'd observed similar discrepancies, but they'd carefully adjusted it so the number of people above and below the expected answer was the same, so it cancelled out and gave the expected answer. But Webb showed that there was an extremely serious discrepancy. Now, did the whole field of nutrition science say, this is appalling, we've got to go back to print basics and examine all these foundations? Not at all. Webb was simply ignored or dismissed, and everything's gone on just the same. Nutrition science is not the jewel in the crown of the modern scientific endeavour. We have a billion people in the world obese, no agreed diet system, nobody knows how it works, and I think it could all be founded on a completely misleading principle. And it may be that prana and chi and other forms of energy do play a role in living systems. There are simple experiments one could do to test this, which I suggest in my book. But here is one of the things I thought was most certain, and when you actually look at it, it's a shambles. And the seeming certainty of this dogma falls apart as soon as you really look at it critically. It wouldn't stand up to a moment's scrutiny, this evidence, if it were evidence for parapsychology or something. The skeptics would be on it like they'd tear it to shreds. But nobody's skeptical about these dogmas because they're dogmas, they're belief systems. Now, I did come to the more psychological aspects of the book. First, the dogma that matter is unconscious. This dogma was formulated in the 17th century by Descartes in the famous Cartesian dualism. The mechanistic theory said all matter is unconscious. He said the mind is something quite separate and different only in humans and angels and God, which is not material. The human mind is not material, but all of matter is unconscious. Now, he didn't prove that matter is unconscious, he just assumed it. He defined it as unconscious. And he created a dualism that we've been living with ever since. Now, most people don't like dualisms. I don't like dualisms. Most people think that two is too many. Personally, I think two is too few. I think we need at least three principles to describe the way the world works. But for those who think two is too many, there's only two ways to go. If you've got mind, matter, and spirit, then one lot says, well, there must be only one thing, it's all spirit. Then you get idealism and that whole school of thought. The other school of thought, which predominated historically, is say, no, there aren't two things, it's not just matter and spirit, it's just matter. And that's how materialism came about, by denying Cartesian dualism, having accepted the Cartesian definition of matter as unconscious. That then creates an enormous problem, because human beings, at least, are conscious. So how do you explain that? This is the conundrum that philosophers of mind have been wrestling with for a long time. Academic philosophers are nearly all materialists. And so they have to try and explain away consciousness, as Daniel Dennett does in his book, Consciousness Explained. And they can explain it in several ways. It's an epiphenomenon, it doesn't do anything. It's just another way of talking about the physiology of the brain. It's folk psychology to talk in terms of subjective states. And this will be eliminated as neuroscience advances. That stance is called eliminated materialism. And the other way is to say it's an illusion, that the brain somehow produces consciousness as an illusion that doesn't do anything. Nicholas Humphrey thinks it does do something, it makes us feel good, and therefore it has a subjective value, but it doesn't actually have any physical action because he's a materialist. In his book Soul Dust, published last year, he came up with this ultimate illusion theory of consciousness. The trouble is, of course, the illusion theory of consciousness doesn't explain consciousness, it presupposes it, because illusion is a mode of consciousness. So materialism is a complete mess. These attempts to explain away the existence of consciousness, which they desperately need to do to remain materialists, fail again and again, even in the eyes of other materialists, which is why they keep coming up with new apparent answers. Some materialists are losing patience, and some have broken ranks. One is Galen Strawson, the British materialist philosopher, who in a key article a few years ago in the Journal of Consciousness Studies wrote a paper called "Does Materialism Imply Panpsychism?" to which he answered yes. He said, we can't explain the existence of consciousness in humans or other animals just if we assume matter's unconscious. We have to assume there's a potential for mentality in all matter. That's the panpsychist position, a sort of mind-like aspect to matter everywhere. It's not a new position, of course, and within a generation of Descartes in the 17th century, some leading philosophers were already exploring this option. One was Leibniz, who suggested that nature is made up of units of organization, monads, plants are monads, we're monads, atoms are monads, and that each monad has a mental and a physical aspect. It has a body and a mental aspect, and each monad mirrors the whole universe from its own point of view. So the universe is made up of conscious entities, all of which mirror the universe differently, because they're all in different places, but somehow, or their minds of all these things are all mirroring the universe from their own point of view. In a way, it's a kind of psychological take on Newton, who said that every particle of matter attracts every other particle of matter in the universe, but just physically without any explanation for it. Spinoza took the view that the whole of nature is like the body, and the mind of the whole of nature is God. So God's the mind of nature, nature's the body, and it's kind of mind-body. It's not separate things, they're two aspects of the same phenomenon. The best and most interesting 20th century panpsychist philosopher was Alfred North Whitehead, who took the view that all organized systems, self-organizing systems, have a mental aspect. But he criticized the usual analysis of mind-body relations, which is spatial. The usual view is the mind's the inside, the body's the outside, the inner world, the outer world, and so on. He said the relation of mind and body is temporal, that each, even an electron, has a physical pole, which is in the past, and a mental pole, which is in the future. And that there's, the function of the mental pole is to choose among possibilities. Possibilities only exist in the virtual future. And these choices affect what happens, and as soon as it's happened, it becomes a physical fact, but it's now in the past. Even an electron, in the Schrödinger wave equation, has a vast range of possibilities, which are not physical, they're not material, because they're just possibilities. When it interacts with something, the wave function collapses, it takes on a definite place and it's immediately identifiable in a particular place. And then it's a fact, but it's in the past. So Whitehead's analysis of mind with forms of causation, physical causation moving from the past towards the present, and mental causation moving from virtual futures towards the past. Two flows of causation, one from future to past, the other from past to future, overlapping in the present, is an exceedingly interesting approach, I think, one that's not been sufficiently developed. And of course, as soon as you start thinking of electrons and atoms as having some kind of mental activity, then one's mind can expand and think about what about bigger self-organizing systems, the sun, the galaxy. Could the sun think? Well, why not? The galaxy, is there a galactic mind? Why not? We don't yet have departments of galactic psychology, but that could perhaps happen at some rather distant stage of the future, and this might be the best springing off ground for it. Anyway, these are big questions, and you know, if you argue, I mean, I obviously get into lots of arguments with my friends about this kind of thing. You know, people say, well, can you prove the sun's conscious? And I said, well, no, I can't. I said, can you prove it's not? And of course they can't. It's simply, it's an open question. But the idea that it's not conscious is simply an assumption from the 17th century, an unexamined, unquestioned assumption, nothing more. Okay, well, now moving on to the next consequence of the mind, matter being the only reality, is the idea that our mental activity is a function of brain activity. It's inside the brain, it's inside the head. This, of course, is the standard default assumption. And everybody here, being interested in transpersonal psychology, must have interacted with colleagues who just take the standard materialist position for granted. They haven't proved it. They just assume it's a certain scientific truth. It's, of course, nothing of the kind. It's simply an outworking of Descartes' assumption that matter's unconscious, and then of the materialist denial of Cartesian dualism. It has a simple philosophical ancestry, and it's a naive philosophical idea which is given all the glamour of being scientific, and with fMRI machines seemingly proving it. But it's, of course, not at all well established that that's the case. And some of you will be familiar with Max Fellman's analysis of vision. I have a rather similar approach. If you think about the nature of vision, the standard explanation, as you know, is that, as you see me now, for example, light's reflected from me, comes into your eyes, inverted images on the retinas, changes in the cone cells, impulses up the optic nerve, changes in various regions of the visual cortex and elsewhere in the brain. That's all described in more detail than ever before by fMRI scans and so forth. But then, does that explain vision? Well, no. It describes changes inside the brain while vision's going on. The fact you're conscious of what you see is totally unexplained. That's an aspect of the hard problem that materialist philosophy can't deal with, the existence of consciousness itself. But then, where are the things you see you're seeing? Well, the normal answer is they're inside your head. Some people will say, well, your brain creates a virtual reality display which it then sees inside your head. That's the usual view. that the representation inside your head, some people just call it a representation, some make it more vivid, a virtual reality display. They have to account for the fact that you're seeing this room now and me and everything else in colour in 3 dimensions, and yet there's just impulses going on in your brain. So where the virtual reality display is supposed to be inside your head. But the hypothesis that I think we have to consider is so simple it's hard to grasp, and that's that your image of me is located right here. It's in your mind but not in your brain. It's projected out when you see things. Your light comes into the eyes, changes happen in the brain, and the visual world is projected out to where you see it. Max Belmont has a somewhat similar analysis, and now this is fairly mainstream in consciousness studies. It's called radical externalism. So, in what form is it projected out? I think it's projected out through mental fields or perceptual fields, and that these fields mean that our minds touch, in some sense, what we're looking at. That means we should be able to affect things by looking at them. And because I'm an experimental scientist, I try and think of experiments to test these ideas. So it's not enough to have this as a philosophical theory, and of course it's a very old philosophical theory. Plato, Euclid, and many others proposed this two-way theory of vision. If you look at somebody else from behind and they don't know you're there, on this view, your mind in a sense reaches out to touch them. Could they possibly feel you looking at them? Could there be a sense of being stared at? Well, as soon as you ask that, you realise this is a common everyday phenomenon. Surveys show about 90% of the population have had the experience of being looked at, turning around, someone's looking at them, or, and this is somewhere where there's a slight sex difference, more men than women have had the other experience of looking at someone from behind and making them turn around. But both sexes have experienced this both ways round, making people turn or turning and finding someone looking at you. Highly relevant and interesting. I've interviewed surveillance personnel who look at other people for a living. Most of us are mere amateurs. And they're, almost all of them, completely convinced of this. In the SAS, when people are being trained how to stab people in the back, they're told when you're creeping up behind someone to stab them in the back, don't stare at their back because they're likely to feel you coming, turn around and shoot you. So you creep up looking as little as possible. If you go on a private detective training course and you're being trained how to follow somebody, you're told, first lesson, don't stare at their back, because if you do, they're likely to feel you, turn around, catch your eye, and recover brain. You have to look at them a little bit, of course, otherwise you lose them, but then you look at their feet. And these things are completely well known. In the martial arts, there are ways of training people to become more sensitive to being looked at from behind. So, is this real? Well, when I first got interested in this about 20 years ago, I searched the psychological literature. I could find virtually nothing on it. 2 papers from the late 19th and early 20th century describing it as a common superstition that needs to be eradicated through scientific education, because vision involves only light coming into the eye. 2 empirical studies that showed positive results, which were never followed up. And I developed a very simple test. People work in pairs. One stares at the back of the other's neck. The person's wearing a blindfold in a random sequence of trials. Can they tell about chance if they're being looked at? The answer is yes. It's been done on a huge scale now, replicated independently by dozens of investigators. It's been running in the Amsterdam Science Museum for 15 years with more than 20,000 participants. The evidence is overwhelming that this is real. Animals seem to be able to do it too. There's a lot of evidence animals can feel human gazes, humans can feel animal gazes, and that this may have evolved in relation to predator-prey relations. A prey that could feel a hidden predator looking at it would escape better. Very little work in the natural history, because the taboo on this subject is almost total within the scientific world, because it so contravenes the standard materialist theory of the mind. And yet, it's an easy thing to test empirically and quite cheap. So I think the mind is much more extensive than the brain, even in our acts of perception. I think our intentions too can reach out and affect others. And I think telepathy is something that occurs between members of social groups, bonded as members of what I call the morphic field of the social group. And because I think it's a common means of communication among animals, in wolf packs, for example, I've investigated it mainly in animals. I did a detailed study on dogs that know when their owners are coming home and showed that this is both common and apparently telepathic. They still know even when people come at random times in taxis or other unfamiliar vehicles. The place where they wait is filmed continuously on video, time-coded video. Some of you have read this, there's papers on this published in a variety of journals, and it's summarised in my book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. The sense of being stared at is summarised together with a whole range of other unexplained human phenomena in my book, The Sense of Being Stared At, and other aspects of the extended mind. So now the same principles apply to human telepathy. I've got a huge database, more than 9,000 case histories of telepathic stories about animals and people. One of them in the human realm is between mothers and babies. Many mothers feel that they can know when their baby needs them. When they're nursing, their milk lets down. Even when they're miles away, they might be shopping in a supermarket and they feel their milk let down. It's an oxytocin-mediated reflex. That normally happens when they hear the baby cry. When there's no baby crying, they're away from the baby, they assume it's because the baby needs them. And they usually go home or ring home, and they're usually right. I've done a detailed study with 9 nursing mothers in North London over a 2-month period each. And the correlation was extraordinarily close. The odds against chance were 1 billion to 1. And it wasn't just a matter of routine, synchronized rhythms. This is a huge area of inquiry. It would be a great subject for an MSc or PhD in a nursing college or midwifery school or something like that. Yet, I'm the only person who's ever investigated, as far as I know. The taboo is so great. It's not because there's no public interest. There's huge public interest in these things. It's because of the blockage in the thinking of scientists. It's not because the experiments are expensive. They're not. I'm currently working on telephone telepathy, which is the commonest kind in the modern world. The phenomenon whereby people think of somebody, and then a minute or two later the person rings, and they say, "That's funny, I was just thinking about you." Or else the phone rings, and before they look at the caller ID display or pick it up and answer it, they just know who it is. 80% of the population claim to have had this experience. It's not paranormal, it's normal. It's part of ordinary life for lots of people. The skeptics will tell you instantly, well, of course it isn't real, it's just coincidence, people forget all the times they're wrong, it's just selective memory and chance coincidence. But they have no evidence for that at all, because until recently no experiments whatever had been done on this subject. The basic experiment I do is where I have the subject names 4 people they know well. We get their phone numbers. They sit at home being filmed with a landline phone, no caller ID. We pick one of the callers at random. They ring them up. The phone rings. Before they pick it up, they have to say who they think it is. I think it's John. They pick it up. Hello, John. They're right or they're wrong. By chance, they'd be right 25% of the time. In these film trials, hundreds of them, the hit rate was 45%. The p-value was 1 × 10⁻12. This has been replicated in Freiburg and in Amsterdam. And I now have an automated version of this test working on the internet, which I invite you to do for yourselves. And if you have students, set it as a homework project. It's a great experiment, it's fun. You log on through my website, sheldrake.org, go to the online experiments portal. You register, it takes 30 seconds. You put in your name and mobile phone number, and then the name and mobile phone number of 2 close friends, cell phone numbers, mobile phone numbers. The computer then picks one of them at random and sends them a text message saying, please ring the subject in a few minutes' time, and they give a landline number, which is the computer. So they ring the computer puts them on hold and then rings the subject. Their caller ID says telephone telepathy test. When they answer, it says, one of your 2 callers is on the line right now. Please guess who it is. Press 1 for Bill, press 2 for Tim. So they guess, and then the line opens up, they get instant feedback. And then after a minute it cuts off because I'm paying for the call. And then after a random time today, it does it again. After 6 trials, they get the result by text message. Everyone involved gets the result. They can do it again. It's a perfect student project. The statistics are fine. There's nothing wrong technically with the test. Professor Chris French, the noted skeptic, has done the test himself and has a group doing it at his at Goldsmith College. Chris French is the only person who scored 0 out of 6 on this test. I've also done similar experiments with SMS messages and with emails, and I'm about to launch a whole new experiment based on Facebook, which would work through the social media. It's hard to recruit subjects for these experiments, but I'm hoping that people who have nothing better to do than communicate on Facebook might find this a more congenial environment for research. So anyway, these experiments are cheap, simple, effective, they're giving positive results, they're great student projects, and they're in the act, and they've escaped the laboratory, they've gone feral now. And I'm trying to encourage some of my friends who are app developers in Silicon Valley to work more on these things, produce intuition training apps, and I'm trying to persuade them to put some of Darrell Bem's experiments onto apps on iPhones and Android operating systems. We could get tons of data, millions, shock and awe levels of data if they were on phone apps, and they'd be fun to do. And the app developers are very interested. I think that's the best way to let this break out of the narrow confines of academic orthodoxy. It will become a social reality very fast. Well, these are just some of the ways in which the science delusion inhibits research in every one of these 10 areas. There are new experiments that can be done, new approaches become possible, science gets more interesting, more fun, more engaging, more likely to attract students, and probably cheaper, because most of these experiments don't cost very much. If you're doing reductionist research, you need very expensive apparatus to look at the smallest possible things. You need the CERN atom smasher costing billions and billions of euros. If you work on things like telephone telepathy, it costs almost nothing, or the sense of being stared at. So it's not as if the barrier is financial. The barrier is a taboo that's been laid up by the baggage that science has inherited from this materialist dogma that gained control of the scientific world in the 19th century. Science is more than materialism. It's a method, an empirical and hypothetical method of inquiry. And I think that when science is set free from this dogma, a new era will dawn when science will begin to realize some of its fuller potential, instead of being held back by these silly dogmas and the baggage of its European past. And finally, this is very important in the modern world because most scientists now are not Europeans or of European background. Last year, 2.5 million people graduated in India with science and engineering degrees, 1.5 million in China, 500,000 in America, and 100,000 in Britain. But of those in Britain and America, a third were Asian. The majority of young scientists now are not from European backgrounds. They have no reason to buy into the historical baggage that has come about through the European past and the rise of materialism and atheism in our culture as a reaction against religious wars. It's a completely different world, and there's no reason they should have to buy into this baggage, and I think they'd make a much more valuable contribution if they were free to liberate it from it, as I think we would ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupert, and thank you for keeping the time. I know you could have told us a great deal more.
Yes, a lot of more unexplored dogmas.
Yeah. Like I said before, I'm keen that we will have some time for a panel at the end, but if anyone has a question, a burning question on what we've heard, then feel free.
Very stimulating talk, thank you. What do you think, I don't know if I can nip in a couple of questions, but what do you think about the possibility of human beings having a kind of negative entropy system going on within them? So we're creating more order than the kind of heat that we're producing, you know, through body heat or whatever. Personally, and also, what do you think about Occam's razor? Because also in science, I mean, I think there might be an interesting case for negative entropy in human beings. I don't know, but in science, just as a separate thing, you know, we try and simplify things and look at the simplest explanation possible. Obviously, that maybe it's a whole mindset thing that we don't realise that's what we're doing in some way. I just wondered your reaction.
Well, those are big questions. I mean, negative entropy, the whole universe is, the whole of life, not just humans, is a production of more evolution, is cosmic evolution, is production of more and more and more order and complexity. Thermodynamics has very, very little to do with it, and you can call it negative entropy if you like, but I see entropy in thermodynamics as being a very limited theory that came about in relation to steam engines, and isn't really all it's cracked up to be as useful in engineering, but as a cosmic principle it's fairly pathetic. It doesn't explain the fact the universe is evolving at all. And what was the second part about?
Occam's razor.
Occam's razor. Well, Occam's razor is a razor used as a weapon by people to dismiss theories they don't like. For example, among cosmologists, because they believe that the laws and constants of nature were fixed at the moment of the Big Bang, which I don't. I think the laws and constants have evolved over time. But you don't, because they think they're fixed, it's led to an enormous elaboration of theoretical speculation. One group think that this means there must be a kind of designer god who fine-tunes it all to start with before pressing the start button. It's a kind of throwback to 18th century deism. And the other lot say, well, no, there's billions of universes, quadrillions of them, we just happen to exist in the one that's right for us. It's the only one we can know. And I was arguing about this with a very noted astronomer in Britain, a friend of mine. And I said to him, well, don't you think this proliferation of unobserved universes, for which there's not a shred of evidence, you know, is going way beyond science, it's not testable, no one's got any evidence for all these universes. He said, yes, but this way we can get rid of God. Actually, they haven't even got rid of God, because philosophers and theologians have pointed out an infinite God with the God of an infinite number of universes. They've just proliferated universes. I said to him, well, don't you think this brings up a problem with Occam's razor, which is that you shouldn't proliferate entities unnecessarily? This looks like the ultimate violation of it. And he said, well, I agree it's a bit of a problem, we're working on it. So, it's an extraordinary thing that if you suggest that there's good evidence for pre-sentiment, like in Darrell Bem's work, or good evidence for telepathy, of which I think there's a lot, there's howls of protest, and people become totally irrational in their attempts to try and oppose this. But to propose there's billions of universes for which there's no evidence, or dozens of extra dimensions, you get away with it scot-free. You can hold down a job as president of the Royal Society, professor at Cambridge, master at Cambridge College, you know, astronomer royal. You can do all that and hold these totally untested and untestable beliefs. It's a double standard. And we, in the realms of working in the realms of psychology, are subject to a lot of taboos that go back ultimately to the witch trials in the 17th century, and which have coloured and shaped these extremely irrational responses. Whereas in astronomy and cosmology, they can say what they like. I rather envy them that.
Again, thank you very much.